Looking back, I can't really remember a time that I've had a solid break from fishing. It's something that I can't ever imagine not doing. It's much more than a hobby, it's more like a lifestyle. I fish every month of the year. I love fishing for carp. It's just something I've never lost the buzz for it.
Yes! Yes!
Fishing to me is it's much more than a hobby, it's more like a lifestyle. It's something that I like to do week in, week out. I fit my fishing around work, my personal life. Yeah, it's something that I can't ever imagine not doing. Looking back, I can't really remember a time that I've had a solid break from fishing. You know, I fish every month of the year. I love fishing for carp all through the year. I fish right through the winters. It's just something I've never lost the buzz for it, and I remember a few people saying when I was younger that you'll burn out in a few years, and you know, I looked at them and just said there's no chance, because it's so passionate to me, and here I am now, years later, you know, travelling to places like here, like sat at Dinton Pastures on white Swan. And yeah, like I just love it more and more every year, and I can't see that buzz, like, you know, that passion for it ever disappearing. I certainly hope it doesn't anyway. And at the moment, it's you know, that passion for it is more alive than ever at the moment. You don't really see the carp that are in this lake too often, like on social media, because, well, they don't get caught a lot, for one, and they're sort of coming through. You know, they are quite old carp, but they're sort of coming into their prime now. You know, like this, it's just become the most incredible lake. Like that, can't comprehend how special these carp are, and it's really nice to be over here, like in this present time, and angling for them. It's been a really enjoyable few years over here. It's been a steep learning curve. I've learned a hell of a lot over here the last few years. You know, these are carp that don't give themselves up easy. It's a busy lake. You know, you're not, like most places these days, you're not just competing against the carp, it's against anglers as well. But these are premium carp, so it's going to attract good anglers. And if you're not sort of thick-skinned to that, you're not going to last too long over here. And a lot of people that fish here regularly, they've made sacrifices for these fish. The lake itself, it's around 25 acres. It's shaped like a dog leg, so it's quite a long lake. You've got a bay at one end, and then it bends round into the main body of water, which maybe the widest point's about 140 yards, and then it comes back into a bit of a bottleneck, then opens up at the end into like a bowl end with a set of reeds at the bottom coming up into shallower water. The average depth in here is around sort of 12 to 14 feet. The water's gin clear all year round. It's a very, very healthy lake, rarely suffers with an algae bloom. Maybe for a couple of weeks in the summer, but it clears up again. You know, some lakes you get an algae bloom all summer, but this, it goes back to being gin clear. The weed, some years, you know, depending on the weed cycle, the weed can hit the surface almost over the whole of the lake, even in the deepest depths. You know, full of Canadian pondweeds, lots of like little clay spots and silty gullies, few gravel patches, but predominantly weedy. So in the spring, like when there's not a lot of weed about, the fish are very flighty. They move about a hell of a lot, and sometimes it's quite hard to track them down, and you could sort of find them one morning, set up on them, but the next morning they've gone and they've moved further up the lake, because you can be so far away from them with how the shape of the lake is, because it's so long. And without that weed there, it doesn't really hold them in any sort of certain area. There's sort of no given rules over here. So it can be a very frustrating lake, and it does take a little while to sort of learn the fish and their behaviours over here. You know, I mean, my first year and seeing it now, like other anglers, you can run around like a headless chicken, and you know, be really put a lot of effort into it for very little reward. So when you do catch one, whether it be a 20-pounder, go on, girl, or one of the big ones, you know, it's every capture is well earned, and it means a lot to most of the anglers. You know, I thought it was going to be easier than what it turned out to be.
Could have been done. The actual rig didn't even come off the spot. It was well to the right.
I found it to be quite a frustrating year.
Can't see nothing at the minute. Where are they?
Quite a mobile angler, so I was moving about a lot on shows. Like other anglers, you know, I'm not saying I'm the only one putting the effort in and acting what I see. I've kind of always angled like that, and that was kind of the approach that I went for when I first came over here. And I wasn't picking up the bites. I was chopping and changing quite a lot. I was sort of doubting what I was doing. I did manage a few fish throughout that year. I think I ended up on 7 fish, which it's not bad, but you know, it's not great either. I did have one fish called the Sanford Common. I actually had it a couple of times within a 2-week period. A very rare fish. Had that fish around 38 pounds. So yeah, I was made up with that one. Sort of going into my second year, the fish were very active. They showed a lot.
Oh my God! What's the show? Did you get that? Did you get that? Maybe. Oh mate, that's on my spot. That was bang on my spot. That was bang on my right hand rod.
It just wasn't doing the bites that I felt like it should be doing. So I decided for my second year I had a plan, and I was going to do things slightly differently. I watched a lot of other anglers how they were fishing. They wasn't fishing too dissimilar to how I was, and I'd heard that people had used zigs in the past, but no one seemed to be doing it. You know, I think the odd angler had done it and had success from it, but yeah, no one was doing it. So I decided if I'm going to struggle this second year, I might as well do something completely different for what I felt was the right thing to do. So I started zig fishing in March, and it was actually my second trip that I caught one. In the middle of the day, 4 foot below the surface, had a really nice 23-pound scaly mirror. And from then onwards, I carried on with the zigs, and the confidence was high. And yeah, I just went on a roll with it. I had a really good spring that year, caught a lot of good fish on the zigs. Can't remember exactly what the best fish was, but I'd had a few 30-pounders. Going into that summer, managed to get some bait going into a quiet corner of the lake. Everything was right for that corner. The weed had hit the surface, and yeah, it was a bit of a horseshoe. The weed had moved and created a bit of a horseshoe, and I just put the lead into that, and yeah, went down a really nice drop and started baiting that, and managed to nick a few fish at the back end of the summer off that zone. I was left alone with it. The anglers over here are really good. You know, it was an area that was neglected anyway. It wasn't like it was a popular swim, so I was left to that and managed to sort of reap the rewards off my effort. Going into my third year, obviously what I'd learnt the previous spring, it was straight in with the zigs again. Now that year I managed one of the better ones. Had a fish called triple row, which is kind of known as king of the pond. It's the biggest fish in the lake, and yeah, I had that at 47 pounds 7 ounce off a zig, 2 foot below the surface, sort of, you know, in the early hours of the morning. Yeah, it's actually a fish that does regularly go over 50 pounds as well. But yeah, had it a bit of a lower weight in sort of mid-April. It was actually on a full moon period. Yeah, prior to triple row, I did actually catch a fish known as the grey mirror. That was my first real big one. Again, that was to pre-baiting strategy. That was a really, really cool carp, real crusty old grey thing, sort of that Italian strain look to it, you know, had a big old drop in its belly, big slopey head, beautiful little starburst scales, just the most incredible carp and still one of my favourite captures. Unfortunately, I actually caught that fish again only a month later with no bites in between. It was just bizarre. I was gutted, you know. I thought it was another fish called the twin, like one of the real old mirrors, which is sadly past now, but the twin wasn't original, and I thought it was that when it sort of, you know, came up for the net. But yeah, it turned out to be the grey again, so just slipped him back without too much fuss. Decided to come back the following year, again on the zigs. The zigs were deadly, like, by this point, you know. By now, everyone was obviously, you know, everyone was doing it as well, so the fish were getting more clued up with the zig fishing, which was making it harder each spring, but you know, the bites were still there to be had, you know. These fish love the sun, so as soon as you get sunny days, these fish are up in the water, they're absolute sun worshippers, and the zigs worked really well, you know. You wasn't going to get these bites on the bottom at that time of the year, or very few, you know, so yeah, the zigs was the way to go still. Yeah, I'd managed a few spring 2020, but unfortunately that's when the pandemic hit, and yeah, everything went into lockdown. So obviously the fishing was done. The lockdown lifted come late May, and yeah, straight back down to Dinton, and it was just a manic year. Like all summer long, it was so busy. I'd managed really nice mid 30 pound linear, another real sort of rare one, hardly ever gets caught. So that was kind of like the season made just from that capture. In the summer, I really struggled. I tried to get an area going, which just, it wasn't really developing. I'd sort of managed a small one, and the tension here can be a bit of a pain too, and I just kept picking up tench sort of most trips. Finally decided to knock that on the head, and just, the fish weren't far away from me, but they seemed to be spending more time on the other side to where I was fishing. So I just started to angle for them rather than try and get something going, and yeah, managed to sort of save me summer and managed to catch a few sort of in that early September period. Had a real nice one, like one in particular. It was sort of caught it about 3 o'clock in the morning. It was just, I netted it, I didn't even know what it was. I'd never seen a photo of it. You know, I just called it double D in the end. It had like these 2 big scales like in the centre of its flank, you know, sort of shaped like the capital D, and yeah, it was a really cool carp, like sunken eyes, big frame fish. Yeah, it's just a crazy lake. Like the fishing here, like it's almost like you're fishing I don't know, like a nature reserve or something. Sometimes you just don't know what's going to come along, and that's such a, you know, that's a great attraction. Like this is why I love fishing this lake, because there's such rare fish in here that you don't even know that exist, and I think that's a real buzz, that is, you know. But yeah, going forward from that, the weed had basically built up down one end. Sort of as the summer starts turning into autumn, the weed starts to break up and it sort of starts turning over, and we was getting a lot of southwesterly winds, so all the wind was pushing down that end of the lake, and it was building up, and the fish, they were doing all of their sort of autumn harvesting down that end, obviously, because that's where the naturals were, and yeah. Done a few fish around that September period down that end of the lake. Bites started to dry up come October, like it usually does on this lake. It's kind of renowned for just going into a bit of a shutdown, sort of around that October, November period. It might do a few throughout October into November, but generally it shuts up. Anyway, I'd managed a few bites in October, I was really happy with the spot that I'd found. It was surrounded by the weed, the spot was good. So I decided that this year I'm going to really carry on and go for it and fish into the winter, something that I've never done on here before. Usually I would, you know, this is 100 miles from home for me, so usually I would go home and fish. I wouldn't stop fishing. I might join a club water, somewhere more local to home, somewhere that's probably more likely for a bite or two in the winter. But anyway, I was really enjoying my fishing this year over here, probably because we missed out on the spring with the pandemic. You know, I really fancied giving it a go. So the lake obviously became quieter. I struggled for the first few weeks. Wasn't even seeing a great deal. The weed was still really thick down that end of the lake, so I decided to continue down in that area. I felt like that's where the fish were probably going to lay up for the winter, to be honest. You know, it held a lot of warmth, the naturals were there, comfort, you know. So that's the area where I targeted, and yeah, perseverance paid off. I'd managed 4 fish in that late November period, and then it quietened down for a few weeks. Then we got some good weather come a week before Christmas, and I'd managed one more bite on the 18th of December, which was a 36-pound mirror, which was a crazy capture. I had to get in a boat for it, because like I say, it was still chocker with weeds, and yeah, that was quite a moment. Getting a fish at that time of year and for it to be a good one as well, sort of, yeah, really capped off that year nicely. And I did try to carry on with it, but unfortunately we got locked down again, went into another lockdown, and yeah, the lake then didn't reopen until this April, end of March. And yeah, it's been an absolute spring to remember, really. I'd fished that late autumn into the winter, and then we got locked down again. It wasn't until late March that we kind of got granted that permission to go out and fish again. I was so eager to get back down there and really looking forward to that first trip back. You know, end of March, coming well into spring now. Although the weather had still been cold leading up to this period, we was due a weather change for that trip. It was actually on a full moon week, and we were due sort of up to 20 degrees temperature, full sun. But on the day that I arrived there, it still felt cold, although it was blowing a southwesterly, maybe a southeasterly. Can't quite remember, but it still felt like a bitter wind. At this point, we could still use 3 rods up until the first day of April. So all 3 rods went out onto sort of low to mid-depth zigs with the weather still being cold. I decided to go back down the end where I'd previously fished in that sort of late autumn period, because that's kind of where I felt like the fish were still going to be held up with all that weed down the end of the lake, and with it being a shallower end of the lake, sort of averaging around 10 foot, this was obviously going to be the warmest part of the lake to warm up quickest. So everything was kind of sort of calling for that end, and yet nothing sort of happened that first 24 hours. Until the sun finally, you know, sort of finally came, and the wind dropped off, and yeah, all of a sudden it felt like we was getting really good spring temperatures. I think it was that afternoon that I thought I started to see fish. You know, they had sort of responded to the sun, and they'd come right up, and yeah, it wasn't until I got up the tree that I started to see pods of fish, you know, a foot or two under the surface. And I'd actually moved one swim along, but by this point, because someone had left, and it just gave me a little bit more room and a little bit more water. So I'd moved into this swim and decided for the night ahead I'm actually going to fish much higher zigs. You know, although the nights were still cold, because we had that sun to generate, you know, the warmth in those upper layers, I went with high zigs for that night ahead. And it was around midnight that I'd got a bite. You know, I'm fishing zigs 2 foot below the surface, and yeah, unfortunately this fish had bumped off quite quickly. I felt it, and then yeah, the hook just popped out. Got the rod back out. It wasn't until the early hours that morning I had a bite off the other rod. This time the fish was on, and it's kiting down to my left. It did sort of got caught up on on some bushes just down to my left margin, and after a lot of faff I've managed to get this fish out of the bush and landed this incredible linear. Like, at first I thought it was one that I might have caught previously, but yeah, it wasn't, and it was a lovely, like, sort of dumpy framed upper 30 linear on weighed just under 38 pound, and transpired that that was only its 4th recorded capture, like, which is just, you know, it's like I've said before, like, it's just insane, like, that, how long these fish can go missing for, and the amount of captures that they've done in their lives, it's hardly anything. I mean, you look at their mouths and they're all immaculate. You know, they haven't got a blemish on them. They're just the most incredible looking fish. Yeah, it just blows you away every time. Like, you know, when you see these type of carp on the bank, and that's why it's such an addictive lake. Anyway, that was a really good start to the spring. Going forwards from that, I had a slow few weeks. I kept on with the zigs, sort of trying to get onto the fish. The fish had started to wake up, and they were a bit more active, and they had started to move from that end of the lake, and they did start to move around the lake. Yeah, things. It was not just me. It was doing a few fish on the zigs, but it was tricky. It wasn't easy. The weather had changed as well. You know, it wasn't getting that warm, sunny weather. It'd gone back to sort of colder conditions. It's been a real slow burner this spring with the weather. So with that, I decided that I'm going to start. You're back down to 2 rods now, so I was going to keep one on the zigs and try one on the bottom as well, and be a little bit different, just because it wasn't doing the zig bites I personally felt like it should have been doing. Yeah, had a slow few weeks, and then I think early May, start of May, I'd finally caught one, and it was off the bottom. I lost the first bite, but it was only a small carp. I lost it at the net, and yeah, it was probably barely a double. Later that evening, I had a bite off the other rod. By now, I've got both rods on the bottom. I had a take off the other rod that evening, and that turned out to be a really cool old original common. There's still a few originals in this lake. You know, it's probably around 200 carp in here, but you've still got a small percentage which are, you know, the Dinton originals, as well as all these other lovely scaly fish that have come from, like, the lakes next door, such as Samford. You've got, you know, there's a real mixed bag of fish in here, and yeah, so that was one of the old ones, 24 common. The next morning, I'd had a bite off that same rod, and that turned out to be another small mirror, around 19 pounds. So yeah, it was a great trip. I'd managed 3 bites that trip after a slow few weeks, and I felt like, you know, things could start to progress now. And yeah, the following week, I've got back into the same area. I'd basically gone back down that end of the lake where I'd started and where I'd done that autumn campaign. Because it was such a slow spring, there was no weed growing up around the lake at this point. And the weed was starting to flourish down that end, and I'd found a really nice spot in amongst that weed, kind of just like a silty spot, but like really firm. You know, it felt like a natural sort of feeding area, sort of, you know, an area that was created by feeding carp. Yeah, I've done really well off those type of spots from this lake over the last sort of couple of years. So they're the kind of spots that I'm looking for. Anyway, I've managed to drop back into this swim the previous week, and we had sort of big southwesterly winds blowing down, so it's kind of like a big crosswind blowing down the lake. Nothing happened that first night or that morning. I'd left the rods out, hadn't touched them. The wind had really started to pick up through the late morning into the afternoon, and around midday I'd had a take off one of the rods. Really good take, savage bite. And straight away I knew that finally into something better, you know. I had actually forgot to mention, it was actually the week after that I'd come back down and managed just one, and it was another small one. And then we move on to this week. I'm now playing a better fish. And yeah, after a right old tussle with it, I managed to bung this big old long linear into the net. It's a fish I knew, you know, I sort of recognised straight away, one they call Whiskers. Gave Tom a ring, and he popped down to get some footage of this carp.
Gotta tell you what, mate, he ain't far off. He would be.
You know, he's just under.
Dial keeps moving. 39.6.
Yeah, sounds about right.
39.7. Yeah? 39.7. That'll f***ing do. 39.7. Oh. Definitely zeroed, right, yeah?
Yeah, it weighed 39 pounds 7 ounce, which is like a top weight for that fish. So, you know, probably now it's over 40 pounds, you know. Another big fish coming through, and the length of it was about sort of three foot long, maybe longer.
I can feel how long he is just by holding him. Does that make sense? That's what it's all about.
So like now I've had two like really cool linears this spring. Like I was so made up, you know, that anything else now is just going to be a bonus. Anyway, I've got another night ahead of me, and again, nothing's happened that night. It's sort of gone calm overnight. The fish were active as well that night. You know, sort of all around, in and around the area where I was, that, you know, fish were active. And sort of woke up that morning, not despondent. I sort of know what this lake can be like, you know. I wouldn't have been shocked if that was the only bite I was going to get, although, you know, fish were clearly on me. Anyway, I was just starting to pack my stuff down around sort of late morning and getting my stuff onto the barrow. And the other rod that had sat there quietly the whole time had just, you know, just ramped off, real strong take. I was fishing, you know, I'm fishing braid, tight clutch, and yeah, it's just putting on the braid, the old rod tip's just like bouncing down, and I was just like, oh my God, this is you know, obviously I've had a few small ones leading up to this, and I know this is another good fish. I've hooked into it, and it's just used all the water in front of me, you know. It's gone from left and it's gone out, it's gone to the other side of the lake, it's then kited back round right, and I've ended up having to wade right down to my right because there's this snag coming out of the margin, and I didn't want it to get round the other side of that, so I've sort of gone down to that snag, and luckily it's sort of come up in front of me, and a member luckily walked into my swim as I'm playing this fish, and he followed me into the trees and passed me over the net, real gentleman, and yeah, managed to net it. I saw it was a really good common, big old white lips come up, and I was like, oh, what is it? I can't believe it, it's a Sanford common again, you know, one that I'd mentioned previously that I'd caught twice on my first year, which it's just a joke, you know. This is now the third time that I've caught it, but it's big, like it's much bigger, you know. After a few years later, it's you know, it's a 40 pounder. I knew it was going to be over 40 straight away, and yeah, obviously I weighed it, and it was 42 pound 9 ounce. It's actually the biggest common I've caught. And yeah, obviously, you know, I wanted to get some more photos of it. You know, it was like a different fish, and yeah, absolutely immaculate. Big old white mouth in it, you know, not a single blemish on it. Yeah, I slipped it back, and I'd actually put the rod back out before doing the photos of this fish, and yeah, I just sat down and started to sort of gather my thoughts, and the rod I just recasted had gone again. I wasn't going to bother. Same sort of take as the common, literally clutch, tight clutch.
I honestly can't believe this.
You know, ripping off the spool, and tip just bouncing down again. I was just like, this is another good one. Again, playing it, just using all the water in front of me, and I thought, bloody hell, like, the fish is just running me ragged.
Honestly, man, like, I can't believe this is happening.
Absolutely ragged, and like, you know, Tom and Lou, they were already down to sort of get the shots of the common and a bit of footage, and you know, now they've managed to get all the footage of me playing this another fish, which was brilliant. What happened? It weeded me up. It weeded me up for about 5 minutes. It was just solid in this weed bed. couldn't feel nothing. Tom had to, there was another member halfway up the lake, and he had a boat with him, a small boat.
Can you believe that, Tom?
I wanted to see it for so. Think how many trips I've had.
You've seen it, and that was a proper take.
Tom's ran up to get it. I've then had to ring him back to say the fish has come out of the weed.
Oh, he's coming. He's coming. Ring Tom. I hope he's got his phone. He's come out, mate.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
And it's now sort of gone down to my left-hand margin, trying to get under these trees. I've sort of waded round as far as I could. I've managed to sort of steer him back round, and he's just kind of, he sort of just rolled slightly in front of me, like, and these big old waves just lapping up. You know, the wind was so strong by now. And yeah, I just caught a glimpse of it, and I thought, that looked like John's linear.
God, it's a whale. Oh my God, it's John's.
Okay.
I think it's John's. No. No way. Can't be.
You know, like one of the last two big ones that I really wanted to catch. And I was still in disbelief. I wasn't 100% sure, but I thought, bloody hell, that looks like it.
Oh my God, what is going on? Yes! Get in!
Yeah, it's come up, and I've just got it in the net, and I was just like, bloody, what is it?
Please. Mate, I think it's John's. It's an upper 40 linear, mate. I can't believe it.
It's John's. It's John. I just couldn't believe it.
Yes!
The most incredible feeling I've had for such a long time.
Mate, I honestly can't believe what the fuck's just happened, man.
It meant so much to me, like all the time that I've spent coming down here, and I just never thought I was going to catch that fish.
Mate, I fucking cry, I think. Fuck, what a session, man. What a session. Look at the dorsal.
After already catching the Sanford Common and the 39 a day before, it was just an absolute dream session, which, you know, sessions like that, they don't come by often at all on this lake. You know, that was my spring, my season, completely made.
See it out in the waves, that only saw a glimpse, like this, the emotion, mate, it's just incredible.
Yeah, obviously I didn't stop there. I obviously came back down the following week. Another crazy fight. Luckily it's just turned and gone into the open water, and I've just seen his, you know, it sort of hit the surface and his big old like sovereign scales just come up, and I was just like, oh my God, what is that? And yeah, managed to sort of shift this one in the net, and just looked in, it's just like it's just scales, like, you know, old looking carp, and thought, wow, this is that second fully, you know. Just incredible, like ancient carp, like one of the true Dinton originals, you know, like 45 years old, and colours on it were just insane. But yeah, later that afternoon, that rod's gone again, you know, the one on the reeds, and I've landed another fish, and it's like another original, like another one that I hadn't caught. Like by now, I've caught most of the ones that that I would have wanted to catch, type thing, you know. And it was like one they call two-tone, and another lovely sort of chestnut, leathery looking mirror. went £32. Going into that evening, everything was, rods were back out good, and yeah, later that night, the open water rod's gone again, and I've had another really nice scaly one, just over £32. Put that rod back out, and only an hour later I managed another one off that rod, which was a £29 mirror. Again, one that I've had before. It's actually a fish I'd caught for the 4th time, so he got slipped back, and yeah, around first light, the reed rod has gone once again, and yeah, that turned out to be another heavily scaled mirror that was just under £32. So it was just an absolute dream session again. You know, I'd managed 7 fish in the last 48 hours of my trip. I was just, yeah, it's just been an absolute manic spring, and it just felt like everything was starting to fall into place, all the hard work, everything was just starting to come together now, you know. And there was really only one more fish that was on my mind that I wanted to catch, and that was one that we called a Jaffa. You know, it's just the most incredible carp, and you know, that fire's going to keep on burning until I get that one in the net. The dream lives on for that last one that I want to catch.